From Eve Levine sending Mac Danzig to the afterlife to Dan Miragliotta poking Heath Herring's eye before the match. There's a lot that referees have gotten wrong in the UFC, and here are some of the worst. Starting with Eve Levine doing his thing. I mean, it's no news that Levine's got things wrong more than once in the octagon, yet he kept on reappearing for some reason. The weirdest of these was what he did during the match between Matt Wiman and Mac Danzig at UFC 115. Wiman had clearly gotten a guillotine choke to restrict Danzig, but he wasn't going to give up. In fact, he kept on indicating that he wasn't going to give up, both to his opponent and the referee. Yet somehow, Wiman, while putting the chokehold on his opponent, was able to convince the referee that he had gone to sleep. Levine, being the gullible person he is, kind of settled with that conclusion and ended the match with Wiman winning it. Here's the twist though. Remember how I told you that Danzig was up? Well, that's completely true, since as soon as the match ended, he got up and protested the decision, saying that he was completely up and running when the win was taken away from him. This further proved that the decision was made unfairly, yet the loss still remains on Danzig's record. But forget about this. Let's talk about something more recent, and how Josh Rosenthal ruined Mark Munoz's night for not just him, but everyone else too. It could have been a very regular match with lots of things to remember the day for, but that wasn't an acceptable outcome for the referee. Chris Weidman showed amazing skills in his middleweight division against Munoz. A perfectly met elbow sent him down to the ground with no signs of him getting up. But you always need some sort of drama, right? That's when things started to get a little confusing. Referee Rosenthal, for some reason, wasn't convinced by Munoz's condition. So instead of calling the match and ending it right then and there, he continued with it. Maybe he had some kind of relationship with Munoz where he didn't want to see him lose. Or maybe the complete opposite, and wanted him to get beat by his opponent. Because that's exactly what happened then. Given such an opportunity, I'm sure Weidman thought it was best to make sure that his opponent won't get up, and so began a series of punches toward Munoz. Still, the referee was unfazed, and only got back to his senses when it was already too late, and too much damage had been inflicted on a defenseless opponent. Intentionally or unintentionally, it was clear that Rosenthal didn't want to let people remember the fight for something actually important. Instead, an image of a person who had already lost, getting beaten up by two big bullies. Yes, I'm counting the referee as one too, and that's because he made a bad call. Doesn't matter if he did it by mistake or intentionally. Speaking of mistakes though, here's one that Heath Herring will never forget. The main event was between two heavyweight giants, Heath Herring and Brock Lesnar. Both fighters were ready to put on a show for the fans, but little did they know that something unexpected was about to happen. As the fighters were about to touch gloves, the referee, Dan Miragliotta, accidentally poked Heath Herring in the eye. Yes, you heard it right. The referee poked the fighter in the eye before the fight had even begun. It was a surprising moment that left everyone in the arena and watching at home in shock. Now, it's unclear whether this incident had any impact on the fight, but what we do know is that it was Heath Herring's last fight of his career. It's quite sad to think that a career that had spanned over a decade and a half ended in such a controversial manner. Miragliotta, on the other hand, received a lot of criticism for his actions as well. The role of a referee is to ensure the safety of the fighters and maintain a fair fight. Accidentally poking a fighter in the eye is not only dangerous, but also goes against the rules of the sport. But why would the referees, the main people given the job of maintaining the rule of law in the ring, be concerned about it, right? At least, that's the impression they've given time and time again. Like, for instance, back in 2011, when Oliveira took advantage of the referee's partiality. It was June 26th, 2011, and UFC On Versus 4 was in full swing. The fight was between two top-ranked lightweights, Charles Oliveira and Nick Lentz, and unsurprisingly, the fight was intense, and both fighters were giving it their all. But no one expected what happened next, especially from these two. Charles Oliveira threw an illegal knee strike to Nick Lentz's head. It was a clear violation of the rules, and the referee, Chip Snyder, was standing right in front of them. Despite being in a perfect position to see the foul, Snyder failed to intervene. The illegal knee knee strike stunned Nick Lentz, and Charles Oliveira took advantage of the situation shortly after he submitted him, building up on the illegal move he had made earlier. The fight was initially ruled in favor of Oliveira, but the decision was later overturned to a no contest due to the blatant foul. This might be fair to some extent, but still, Nick Lentz lost his chance to fight, so not really. Now, here the outcome may not be appreciated by Lentz's fans, but that's not always the case with fans. Fans of Pat Curran, for example, weren't complaining when the referee didn't intervene. The date was March 9th, 2012, and Bellator 60 was underway. The fight was between bantamweight fighters Joe Warren and Curran. The two fighters had a history of bad blood and were looking to settle their differences inside the octagon. The fight was intense, with both fighters exchanging blows. However, as the fight progressed, it became clear that Pat Curran was getting the upper hand. He landed a series of brutal strikes on Joe Warren, who was clearly out on his feet. Despite being in a vulnerable position, the referee, Jeff Malott, failed to intervene. Joe Warren took a lot of unnecessary punishment, and the fight continued for way longer than it should have. But what can you do when the referee's not in the mood to do his job? No wonder MMA is considered one of the most dangerous sports in the world. But to end it, let's talk about one recent incident. The women's flyweight title bout between Valentina Shevchenko and Alexa Grasso was one of the most anticipated fights of the night, and living up to its hype, the fight was equal parts intense and fun. During the third round, Shevchenko landed an impressive takedown halfway through the round. She was in a dominant position and was still throwing punches at Grasso. However, to the surprise of many, referee Jason Herzog stood both women up for inactivity with a minute remaining. It comes without much surprise that this decision was met with tons of booing from all over the stadium. Not just the fans, but also the commentators. Specifically, Joe Rogan was highly critical of the situation as well. He noted that Shevchenko was still throwing punches and was clearly in a dominant position. So why stop the fight and break it off? It's not like they're kids fighting in the streets, are they? Nonetheless, the decision obviously played a major part in the result, though it's important to note that after the event and related news cooled down, Herzog was able to reflect on his mistake. At least, that's what he said to a user on Twitter who asked him that exact question, to which he said that he did what he thought was right in the moment, but now, since all of this criticism, he's ready to change his ways and reevaluate the decision, which is a good sign, sure, but it won't bring back the moment that was lost by both fighters, and there you have it, some of the worst mistakes made by UFC referees.